Hello everyone, this is Kestrel Raptorial. So we're going to have a talk about the recent natural disasters that have raged across California. So this week, it is the conclusion to the second week of January 2018. Southern California was struck by massive mudslides. The confirmed death toll, as far as I've been able to find out, is 17 people and 28 more injured. Who knows how many unaccounted for may be buried. Now, every time a natural disaster such as a hurricane, wildfire, mudslide, an earthquake, volcanic eruption, or so on, happens, there is a chance to learn from the event once the immediate relief efforts have concluded. Recovery is underway. There are often, in retrospect, warning signs that people could have and or should have noticed. And in this case, in a way there were. There is a YouTube video, which I will link to in the description below along with all my other sources, of a news report that in fact does suggest, even predict, that the recent widespread wildfires, the Thomas Fire, which we will get to talking about in a bit, that raged across the hills and mountain slopes of Southern California would create the conditions for mudslides. Now, a mudslide is a waterlogged landslide. The landslides are, well, exactly what they sound like. A collapse of the soil and all of the debris, the rocks, boulders, trees, as well as whatever happens to be in its path, as it slides down the slope. Coastal landslides can also create tsunami, and if the slide is large enough, mega tsunami. In fact, there is a real concern about the western flank of the island of La Palma in the Canary Islands. Rainwater that leaks into the volcanic caverns and, heated by the magma, is slowly but very literally splitting the island apart. And when the western piece detaches, and it will one day, well, it's not good for the east coast of the Americas in a matter of mere hours. For the time being, however, let's go back to Southern California. From January 4th, 2018 to January 12th, the Thomas Fire scorched almost 282,000 acres across the Santa Barbara and Ventura counties of Southern California. Although it's not clear how the fires began, this is a region of the continental United States that is extremely vulnerable to seasonal wildfires. Now, the blaze of the Thomas Fire at its peak spanned an area of 60 miles long, 40 miles wide, and for days it raged uncontained. Southern California, prior to the ignition of the fires, had been without rain for 251 days. That's almost 8 months. Now, vegetation used to somewhat more equal cycles of wet and dry seasons. A drought of this scale is going to turn them into, well, little more than kindling. Along with 40-60 mile per hour erratic winds, which means winds constantly shifting directions, just let the flames expand without resistance. 900 homes were destroyed, and the life of 32-year-old firefighter Corey Iverson was lost. He was a husband and a father with another child on the way. That was the Thomas Fire, the largest wildfire in the recorded history of Southern California, and I also have in the links an article from Fox News comparing it to other large-scale wildfires. While doing research, I also found an article from the University of California Cooperative Extension that talks about, in detail, the climate, seasonal cycle of wet and dry seasons and fires in the Southern California habitat. So, let's talk about this region. So, quoting a little snippet from the article here, the temporal means time-related, aspects of the fire regime of a particular place and plant community include which season fires occur in and how long the fire season is. In Southern California, fires naturally occur during summer and fall, when dry weather removes most of the moisture from many plants and hot, dry winds can spread any fires that ignite. In unaltered systems, it also includes when natural sources of ignition, such as lightning, occur. In Southern California, however, most fires are ignited by human activity, and the largest fires occur in the summer years of low rainfall and extended dry periods, and in the fall during Santa Ana wind events. Fire frequency describes how often fires occur, and return interval is used to describe the average number of years between large fires. Now, whether the fires are started by humans, by lightning, or whatever other means might occur, the reality remains that this is a habitat that is extremely vulnerable to fires. In a region that is very dry year-round with little vegetation, such as the Namib or Atacama Desert, fires are extremely rare because there's almost no fuel for them. There's oxygen, but there's not much kindling. Quoting from the same article, the one titled Climate, Fire, and Habitat in Southern California, the first paragraph. The climate type in much of California is described as Mediterranean climate, with winter rains and hot, dry summers. Second paragraph. The plant communities found in these areas are dominated by large, woody, evergreen shrublands. Individual plants have small, thick, waxy leaves to help retain moisture throughout the dry summers, and have developed adaptations to their native fire regimes. Some shrubs have underground root crowns that allow them to resprout after a fire. Others are killed by fire, but produce seeds that can remain in the ground for many years, germinating in response to smoke, heat, and ash. Some species do both. During the first spring following a fire, it is common to see fire flowers, annuals that germinate in response to a fire and produce beautiful flowers. They won't be seen again until the next fire. So, what this means is you have a terrain, a biome, that is very adapted to seasonal fires. And what you had was, over the course of this last spring to summer to fall, and now the middle of winter, was a very prolonged dry season, which turned the plants into kindling. Then you had the wildfires, the Thomas Fire, then the rains, and the mudslides. So this is a cycle that is actually very characteristic of this type of region, this type of habitat, particularly when it's on slopes, when it's foothills or mountainous. When you have very distinct wet and dry seasons, such as in Southern California, there's a lot of vegetation that blooms after the rains. But during the dry season, many of them will remain alive, but they will go dormant. They will go into a kind of hibernation, retaining water until the rains return. Finally had to turn the light on. It's on fire back there. So anyway, when there is an unusually long dry season, followed by an unusually intense fire, such as the Thomas Fire, even the vegetation adapted to the seasonal fires will often be destroyed. The seeds in the ground, many of them will survive, but until they germinate, until the vegetation returns, it is no longer keeping the soil in place. This is one of the roles of vegetation in the ecosystem, aside from providing food for herbivores and retaining water. The root system keeps the soil in place, keeps the nutrients in place. Vegetation will also often act as a water absorber, and in coastal ecosystems, wetlands, one of the reasons they are so important is they are effectively ecological sponges that will absorb water from storm surges, from tropical storms and hurricanes. The more wetlands you have on the coast, the more protected inland areas will be, which is something I wish coastal cities would take into account a little more. In foothills in a mountainous region with a distinct wet and dry season, you get a prolonged dry season in which a lot of the plants dry up. The seeds in the ground are still alive, but they're not holding the soil in place. Along comes a very intense fire, destroys most of the vegetation above ground. Well, they're no longer holding the soil in place, and the rains come and mix with the soil. There's the vegetation to hold it in place is gone. It's on a slope. Mudslide becomes inevitable. So, I do not intend to reduce the tragedy of the situation at all. And now there's going to be a lot of rebuilding and rethinking among the Southern Californians for quite some time now. This is the perfect environment and the perfect recipe for mudslides like this. They will happen. See, it is so easy to read about or watch in documentaries about historical natural disasters across the countries, across the world, and believe that the lessons have been learned, but usually they have not. Southern California, this is a region that had every single environmental factor perfectly set up for this. And again, not to undermine the tragedy at all, but at some point we have got to start planning better. Planning more wisely. Understanding these seasonal cycles, these natural events, and planning accordingly. Because we can't keep pumping resources and losing lives into living into areas that are just going to be hit over and over and over again. Southern California, not only a region extremely vulnerable to this kind of thing, but one of the most geologically active areas in the United States. So once the disaster has passed, let's not build there again. A bit of learning might actually lead to a little less mourning. This is Kestrel Raptorial. Feel free to check out my list of sources, and I'll see you soon.